Hey everyone, and welcome to another chat here on Hangfire. We are here today with my very special guest. Bill Janovitz is a founding member of the great band Buffalo Tom, and as a writer, his work has been featured on AllMusic.com, The Observer, and Esquire magazine. He is the author of several incredible books, including, as part of the 33 and a Third series, his installment on Exile on Main Street. He's written the acclaimed biography, Leon Russell, The Master of Space and Time's Journey Through Rock and Roll History. He's also written, which is what is probably my favorite biography on the Rolling Stones, Rocks Off, 50 tracks that tell the story of the Rolling Stones. I love this book, and I savored every page while reading it. Even if you think you know the Stones' entire story, it is a refreshing and careful review of their incredible career. His latest, The Cars, Let the Stories Be Told, from Da Capo Publishing, will be out this fall. So it is with great pleasure to welcome Mr. Bill Janovitz. Bill, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure. I was telling you earlier, as I was reading Rocks Off, every page I turned, I was like, I can't wait to talk to Bill. So for this day to happen, I'm just tickled. What I love about the book is what really makes it stand out compared to other Stones biographies, which is the format of the book. And like the title says, you use 50 tracks across the Stones' entire discography to help tell their huge story. And was always curious as I was reading, because that's a brilliant way to format the book. How did you decide on doing a book about the Stones in this way?
I wish I could take credit for the format idea, but I had not. So the Exile book was before this, probably 2005, I think it came out, and I had not considered doing another Stones book, and I was just happy to do one book, and I hadn't yet kind of accrued traction or whatever as a writer yet at that point, in terms of being an author. But it was like 2012. I get a email, I guess, from an agent overseas. He's an English guy working at a literary agency in Scotland, in Glasgow. And he said, "Hey, I saw you wrote this great book. I'm a fan of this Exile book. Would you consider doing one for their 50th anniversary?" And somewhere along the line, really early on, he said, something along the lines maybe of Ian MacDonald's Revolution in the Head about the Beatles, where it's like contextualizing the Beatles. I think it was pretty much the same format. It's been a while since I've picked up Ian's book, but it's sort of it's a great book on the Beatles. And I haven't read everything on the Beatles, but I've read a lot. But it's just, it contextualizes those songs and where they were in their career with the ever changing times, the rapidly changing times of the 60s, of course, actually into the 70s. And so, yeah, I thought it was a great idea. It was like handed to me on a platter, and it kind of went to what I feel are my strengths, or certainly at that point felt were my strengths, which were writing about songs and why I loved certain songs, and then weaving in the already pretty well told biography of the Stones. Nobody needed just another straight up history of the Stones. It's more like digging into the songs. It's like, oh, it was a real. Each song provides a real good launching point for where they were at that point.
I mean, each chapter is titled with a song, and you really tie the theme of the song to really an event or the timeline so well. And it just got me so, giddy to go through the timeline like that, because it made me put on the songs as I was reading the book. So that much I loved a lot. And what I loved also is that you really get inside the songs and inside the music, and balancing speaking about it as a listener, but also as a musician, which is one of the things that really resonated with me, because I also play guitar. So like, for you to make connections on that level was huge. And I love, for example, your description of Under My Thumb. And I was wondering if I could ask you to read a small excerpt from the book, because your description of the song's production is really what made me go, this book is what makes it special compared to other books. And so I'd love for you to read that couple paragraphs, if you could.
Yeah, sure. You had mentioned these couples, so let's see. Now, I haven't read these in advance, so I'm probably stumble and mumble here. But the first thing you notice on Under My Thumb is the marimba, of course, played by Brian. But the song starts with Charlie just tapping out three notes of time before he slips into one of the great Stones grooves. A shuffle. Now this is incorrect. It's not a shuffle. In fact, somebody called me out on this. Now this is my musician thinking he's smart, but it's not a shuffle. We're just it's
Right.
the
Uh-huh.
shuffle, right? But it feels shuffly to me in a non. So anyway, a shuffle right out of the playbook of Bernard Purdie, another drummer raised on jazz, who had been playing with James Brown, Aretha Franklin, and other giants of the '60s. But it is predominantly the sound of Motown that we hear on Under My Thumb. Compare the feel and finesse from Charlie, coupled with Bill's strong, very present bass, to tracks such as Mary Wells's My Guy. As with the drumming on that 1964 track, Charlie adds a little giddy up to the snare drum. It's not just the backbeat that he plays, it's all the jazzy shuffling in between the beats, the snare and hi hat finding space left by Bill. Bill works absolute bass magic here, varying his counterintuitive bass pattern in a push and pull around Charlie's steady beat, making the groove so compelling, harmonizing with the marimba. Off in the background, Mick, presumably, is snapping his fingers on the backbeats. It's a classic opening, the sort that you would listen to on its own in an endless loop. The feel of it is perfect, ripe for sampling. Yet it promises something more. It's suspenseful in a tiptoe Pink Panther sort of way, the Stones at their most laid back cool. Not coincidentally, it was the tune that the band would pull out in December 1969 at Altamont to try to soothe the rattled nerves of the Hells Angels bullied crowd.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you.
I love that. And the book is filled with those kind of zoomed in looks into the music and the production. And it's funny because as I was reading it, I always felt that Under My Thumb was always a special track. Is it one of many outliers, you think, in the band's catalog?
Yeah, I mean, it's one that everybody loves, I think, even casual Stones fans. And, my first Stones records were actually hand-me-downs, and I talk about this in the book. Mono, I have this just right back here. I still have the mono pressings of Out of Our Heads and
Nice.
High Tides of Greengrass. Um, but then I think one of the first records I bought, period, but certainly one of the first Stones was Hot Rocks, right? And like you've got this great survey of their career, really great compilation of songs, really good choices. Really good versions. For example, you get the Ya-Ya's version of
Hmm.
Midnight Rambler, stuff like that. And I mean, Under My Thumb always stuck out at me. And there's the sound, but then you learn later as you get older. Like as I should talk for myself, but it was like okay, like this. Of course, there were people that grew up with them and saw each iteration as it happened. But for me, it was like realizing, oh, this is like a great leap forward. This is sort of that aftermath era where they're sort of like branching out here, getting different sounds in. It's a little bit more, it's less R&B and blues maybe, and more a little bit sort of pop and country and other. This is like where they're getting into that Stones stew, which is like, it's not just the Stones imitating Jimmy Reed or Chuck Berry or whatever, Muddy Waters. Or maybe even Marvin Gaye on like Hitchhiker. It's them writing to their sound, which they had sort of started to groove into, and it's their sound evolving with their writing. So they're growing into the Stones here.
And you're touching on what I think is their superpower, isn't it? They're able to look at different sounds and different flavors and go, I'll take some of this, we'll take some of that, but it's still their personality at their core, isn't it? It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Beatles come out with their first record, and they seem like this fully formed, almost out of from outer space kind of thing. And
Right.
the Cars, I'm writing about them now. I'm just doing my final edit. They were similar in a lot of ways. I mean, it's like you don't see all this sort of journeyman work that comes to the pyramid. With the Stones, it was a bit more like, let's form a band. Oh, the Beatles got big. Oh, we should sign these guys. And they had this raw energy and power, but they had not yet gotten to the finesse level, and arguably maybe they never did of the Beatles in that sort of traditional Beatles craftsman way, but they became the Stones, which is this, like I said, it's more of a stew, more of a groove, a little bit more sort of this ineffable stuff. They didn't have those whatever 10,000 hours in Hamburg that the Beatles had. They had probably 5,000 Crawdaddy or something in the those places.
You use the songs in the book as these flag posts in the timeline perfectly. And it's a great way to tell the Stones story, especially because they have such a long career. And for critics of the band, and a lot of fans out there even, that longevity is more of a minus than a plus. And I've always wondered, what other fans think. It's my favorite question to ask. So what do you think of the critics who say that their longevity has hurt their career instead of helped them?
I don't know. I don't know that I've heard that, and I don't know how that point would be made. I mean, just sticking around does not. I mean, look, am I interested? Was I interested in going to see the Stones without Charlie? No. I mean, but I've seen. I was. I was not fortunate enough to see the Stones. I was born in '66. I was not fortunate enough to see them in the '70s. I was still a kid. By the time they came to New York, which is where I grew up, on the Tattoo You 81-ish tour, I was still pretty young, but I was able to try to get tickets, but tickets were almost impossible to get back then, and I couldn't afford scalper prices. So I didn't really see them until they regrouped, at whatever, 88, 89 on Steel Wheels. So, but I got to see them every tour after, and they got better actually in those years from like Steel Wheels to where I last saw them in 2013. I thought every tour got a little bit better, and a lot of it had to do with Chuck Leavell, and I think those guys sort of like embracing their legacy instead of just trying to stay on top and be so. At a certain point they became a legacy act. They still wrote new stuff, but I think some of their most interesting music was some of the more recent releases. I mean, some of the more interesting music, let's say, of the last 30 years were some of these last two, like Blue and Lonesome and Hackney Diamonds. I was pleasantly surprised at the quality of the latter. The blues record came out of nowhere. I was like, holy, this, nobody plays the blues like these guys do, in such a great way. They get it, they got it. And it was almost like this return to form. But, sticking around was what their heroes did. I mean, they always pointed to Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. And I mean, it was I'm it's funny, I'm talking about the Cars right now, and they come out with their record in '78, and nobody knew at the time how old Rick Ocasek was, but he was older than, I think he was around the same age as Ronnie Wood, and he was older than like Neil Young, Steve Winwood, Eric Clapton. He's like an older guy, and here are the Stones in 1978 putting out Some Girls, and they're like, these old timers that grew up with them are like, wow. Are they too old for this? They're 30 something, It's like, it's so ridiculous. And so, I mean, it's just that the examples were far and few between by the time they sort of going past the Beatles breakup.
And you touched on this a couple seconds ago, but the Stones have gone through so many kind of lineup changes, yet, they keep hanging on in a way. And, I've often tried to figure out what makes this possible. It seems like the Stones get pass of some sort compared to maybe other bands, because a lot of fans seem to have a cutoff period for the band. The Stones ended with Brian Jones. The Stones ended with Mick Taylor. The Stones ended with Bill Wyman. The Stones ended with Charlie Watts. Yet they keep going. How do you find yourself in all that? Are there cutoff points for you?
No, I mean, well, I guess I said there was. I mean, now they're they are truly elderly, and I think they've lost the clips I've seen. I think they've lost quite a bit since 2013 of their fastball, their collective fastball. Like I don't, Keith can't play like he used to, and without Charlie, I mean, I like Steve Jordan. I went to go see the Expensive Winos tour. I love that stuff, but it was like a different sound. It's Keith doing something else, and I think he's did a serviceable job, certainly on the record. But yeah, for me, like the shocking realization was how much, and I don't know if it was that shocking to me back then or not, but I don't think anybody realized like the difference that a bass player makes, especially a bass player like Bill, and especially a bass player like Bill in a rhythm section with Charlie, and especially a rhythm section like Bill and Charlie, who don't follow the drummer but follow the guitar player. It's like such a distinctive thing. And to mess with that was really to kind of change the sound in a fundamental way. Like you're never going to get that. Like I was just listening to Route 66 from the El Macambo side, actually the El Macambo re-release. And it's just, I mean, I think even if, and then Darryl seems like a great guy, and he seems like he is a great bass player, but it's different when a group grows up together like that. Those guys had gotten this weird mojo, and I talk about it in the book, and how, you know, Charlie's maybe a little bit behind Heath's guitar, and Bill is fitting himself in there. But if you listen to just this simple 12-bar blues of Route 66, the standard, Bill just has this pocket where he's just swinging this simple walking bass line. But it's, like so many acts would do that song straight ahead, sort of plow over it. And I don't know, it says I'm reconnecting here, but hopefully it's okay. But yeah, it's just like he had this innate sense of swing, and it's weird. It's like, I don't know if it's just my imagination, but Darryl seems to sort of fill up a lot more space than Bill did, who almost always in sort of a slightly more staccato way, even when he's sort of playing those funky, more disco lines on something like Miss You or something. There was something always that had a little bit of sense of space,
And, I watch Bill play, and the way he angles that neck, I mean, sometimes I just want to say, Bill, just get an upright bass already.
He plays like an upright player, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. That's my feeling.
Because those are who he grew up with. I mean, an electric bass was a kind of still a brand new novelty in the '60s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what lends that percussive element that you're talking about. Because in an upright, you have that, and it's an acoustic instrument. You get to exercise that part of the instrument where, hey, you want to give it a pop, you want to give it some space, you can do that. And
slap it, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And that's, I think, part of the quirkiness of his playing. My sense with Darryl is that, and I think this maybe ties to your point, because you said that on every tour you saw them, they just got better and better. And I really think my view of it is that it seemed like from '89 on, and then '94 on, Chuck and Darryl really create this framework for the band, and it's eliminated all those train wrecks that I don't know how many bootlegs you've heard from the '80s and '70s, but that's a lot of band tough moments were had, and Chuck and Darryl sort of eliminated all that risk, which is, great for Mick in a way, because he needs that confidence to know that there's not going to be any fuck ups tonight, but I think at the price of the risk of the music being, wobbly a little bit. Oh, where's the risk in Route 66 being unpredictable, like the way you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, the endings were never predictable. I don't think Charlie ever knew where a song was going to end. And it's one of the fascinating things about the deep dives into Charlie is to understand that, and I'm not sure how much of this is exaggerated, but really, like, I always talk to Andy Johns and Bobby Keys, whoever was in the room, and they'd be like, yeah, like they would just play forever. And it's like, they would just play those. It's like, just Start Me Up is a great example. They'd play that for like, hours and hours all day. Then they just throw off this, and they were trying it as a reggae, whatever. Then they throw off this one probably frustrated thing. And Charlie's like, okay, we're doing this now. And his fills sometimes seem so strange, where the cymbals land. And a lot of that had to do with just, he wasn't sure where they were in the arrangement. It's like, are we going to the part B here? And like, so it might be a slight delay going into the rock, whatever it is, So, but the endings were like, they seemed to never discuss it. It was like eye contact. You still see it today. Mick turns around and starts looking back at Keith and Charlie, saying, okay, we're ending it here, right? But there's that sense of loosey-goose stuff that's great. I mean, but like you said, to your point, Chuck especially, I think, as a music director, brought them back to some of the original arrangements. Like, You Can't Always Get What You Want was never played like that,
right?
A record version until 2013, I guess, right? Like all those other versions were maybe somewhere in the 90s they started. I don't know, but they it's like it's those live like Love You Live versions. It's this new thing. It's a whole different. And they never really like even Under My Thumb, the version I'm talking about in that chapter where they play the recorded version, but then they come up with this Yaya's version that's on that you see in Give Me Shelter, and it's just this bluesy or slow kind of thing.
And that was, it's funny you mentioned Midnight Rammer specifically off Hot Rocks and Under My Thumb at Altamont, but the live versions of a lot of Stones music is really its own beast, isn't it? And
Mm.
that's what makes listening to the band so rewarding. It's because you have the context of those songs as it was in the studio, but as Keith says, it turns into something else. And I always saw it that way too, that I mean, when they're recording it in the studio, the song is what, a month old, or 3 weeks old, as opposed to when they've played it for a year. The song, what's the song then?
Yeah, no, and the Stones were one of those few bands that's pretty early on that just started writing in the studio. Same with the Beatles, I guess. It's because they both could afford the studio time, and the Beatles became just a studio band at a certain early point. But the Stones, like like that "Start Me Up" example. There's countless examples of I mean, the most famous one perhaps is "Sympathy for the Devil," which is captured on film. It's like I think that was typical of their writing process. Or you hear these these endless versions of "Good Time Women" or "Woman" and how it became "Tumbling Dice," and it's like they just captured that moment there, and then they go on to the live versions, which are not quite the same, and not even close to the same in many
Hmm.
respects.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And yeah, it was really in the 90s when they, even got backup singers to join them and, a larger, group so they can finally do those songs, quote, justice to. And I don't, was that a trend that was going on where it was, decided somewhere in the concert industry that no, fans want things to be more dialed down, more, based on the studio recordings. It's strange that
I don't
that
know.
was
I
a
mean, I guess
decision.
it depends which kind of band you're talking about,
Mm.
like, and I don't mean to keep coming back to this Cars book, but it's top of mind. But it's like they were famous for playing the songs exactly like they were on the record. The Eagles eventually sort of adopted that as well.
Mm.
And but then there were bands that I think fans that would go to see the Stones were like, no, I mean, we all grew up with those live albums. I mean, there were people that just knew their hits and knew the Hot Rocks versions or whatever. But for the most part, I think people like Stones fans, maybe not to the extent of like Dead fans, or jam band fans, but they expected something more of a show and more of a different. You never know, and like Dylan, it's like you never know what you're going to get with some of these guys. I mean, these are extreme examples. I mean, for me, you touch on the background vocals. I love having a lot of those background vocals, especially when doing the non-Keith parts. It's just the ones that once Keith stopped singing, that's something else I really missed because Keith brought a real edge with those harmonies, and that was gone pretty early on in somewhere in the 90s. Like he would rarely get up there and sing backups, which kind of a bummer.
No, totally. And I think, was it on the 2013 tour that on one of the modern tours, he joined the background vocals on Honky Tonk Woman, for example, which was rare. And I was like, oh, wow, so good to see him back on that,
Yeah,
And
yeah,
for a while, he was joining on the backgrounds for Satisfaction, which technically there are no backgrounds, but I remember
yeah.
him there on it. And it's just, yeah, because that was sort of the Glimmer Twins magic, isn't it? To have, and I've been saying on this channel that the Mick Jagger, Keith Richards vocal blend is one of the most underrated blends in rock.
I'm with you. I mean, when I think of the Stones, one of the first images that comes to mind is either something like this where they're at the same table, or but usually first is just them sharing a microphone. It's like this,
Right.
the poster I had in my room, or like the image of them at the mic in Exile where they're sharing a bottle of Old Grandad. It's like it's them at the same mic. Never mind him singing with them,
Right.
but singing together.
Yeah, everyone talks about the Beatles and their harmonies, and obviously they have more lush, more complex things going on. But there's something more rootsy going on with Mick and Keith's blend as well.
Yeah, I mean, they were huge Everly's fans, and the Everly brothers are obviously whatever Rock and Roll Hall of Fame gods, but there's still something about the Everly brothers I think people don't quite understand how influential they were, not just harmonies, but like the guitar playing. Like when I hear Keith certainly, but really Pete Townsend
Hmm.
or Paul Simon strumming in these sort of aggressive patterns, it's like, yeah, but to get back to the point, the harmonies, those guys all grew up. I mean, Keith is such a fan of the Everly Brothers. And I think Keith is so self-deprecating about his voice, and it was an acquired taste. But Keith's voice is in that same neighborhood as Ron's voice, which is in the same neighborhood of Dylan's voice, which is that nasally, edgy kind of thing, which really works nicely with Mick's rounder, sort of vowely kind of thing.
Would you say that one of the things that differentiates them from other British invasion bands is that not only were they obsessed with like American roots music, be it blues or country, that it was also other ingredients too that made them special, maybe other world music elements? Because it seems I've been trying to figure out what it is that makes the Stones different from the other British invasion bands that all seem to be homogenized in terms of a sound, but they kind of broke off, didn't they?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess it's hard to generalize about all the different acts. I mean, yeah, there were certainly a lot of sound alikes for the Beatles, and you got the Hollies, but then I think as soon as a group is around long enough, like the harmonies of the Hollies and the guitar playing there became its own thing. I forgot the guitar player's name of the Hollies, but he's very influential on certain guitar players, including including Elliot Easton, who I was talking. Um, but yeah, I think and Jerry and the Pacemakers, whatever. But the Stones, they were never as interested in making just pop music. There was always that push and pull with their R&B nerdy, club kind of like this ownership of them as like an R&B group. And you know, Brian struggled with wanting to be extremely famous and a pop star without being sort of pop, and he could never write anyway. But he was, I think, really put. But also, you mentioned the world music. I mean, he was the most musically adventurous guy at that point in the band, bringing in the marimba, bringing in the sitar, of course. He was one of the first to play the sitar, maybe before George, I forget. Um, but he was right there with them. So yeah, and then of course the magic pan, the musicians of Jajuka,
Yeah.
the Moroccan stuff, and beyond the Stones. So, and he was interested in electronic music, and I mean, who knows what directions they would have gone in had they could. Have they been able to sort of stay together with him at that point?
Do you like those deluxe editions that they've been coming out with? I know Tattoo You had a deluxe edition. Some Girls had one, Goats Head Soup, and Exile, where they added a bonus disc of all these finished outtakes that Mick finished like 40 years later. Did that rub you the right way?
Oh, I love having it. Yeah. I mean, the goat's head stuff, there was some interesting stuff there for sure. But I mean, I end my Rocks Off book that was the Exile thing was just coming out then. I was like, I'm like right in the buyer pool for that. It's like they might as well. It's like the take all my money thing. It's like as soon as I came out, and I couldn't believe how good Plundered My Soul was. Like it's one of my favorite, not all time favorite Stone songs, but it's up there, and it's something it's like one of the, and it's not a new song, it's like there is something weird about Mick's to then contemporaneous voice on this old, it's one of those songs, those Exile songs. It captures the same groove as Tumble and Dice or whatever else. But it's weird to hear that like chirpy, more clipped Mick, whatever. But
Yeah.
it's somehow it works,
Oh, I know, because I had trouble with his vocals around that period. He was getting more nasally, and I don't know if he was doing something to conserve his voice on tour. I'd have no idea. But once I heard that he was doing these outtakes, I was concerned, like, oh God, was he? And it seemed like as he was doing more of those deluxe editions with these bonus discs, it almost like corrected something in his vocal because it almost like he did his homework and like, oh God, no, I just sing that way. Okay, let me try
Right.
this. And then it stuck. Thank goodness. I always felt like
Yeah.
it sort of, thank goodness he did all that stuff because now when he sings on stage, he's more relaxed a little bit. And on Hacky Diamonds, it's like, oh, there he is. That's the guy.
Oh, that's an interesting observation. Yeah, I don't know if I'd paid that much attention. I mean, yeah, it was good to see him stop running around so much because like it's like I don't need you. You just go, get off my thumb, whatever, get off my cloud. It's like I know you can still run around, but I want to. I would rather like I loved when they would come out to the center stage,
Oh
so
yeah.
they couldn't run around. It's like just stay in one spot. Let me just hear you. I don't need you to be Michael Jackson.
Yeah, I miss those B stages too. They'd always be our only place to hear somewhat rare, obscure songs. They'd play on a B stage. They'd play
Yeah,
"Crazy
yeah.
Mama" or "19th Nervous Breakdown" or something
Oh
like that.
wow, yeah.
Um,
I don't
uh,
remember hearing him do Crazy Mama. That would have been great.
yeah, that was during the '97 tour, '97, '98. I'll send you some
Oh,
recordings of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It got me thinking because I was reading your Exile book. Um, it got me thinking about you responding to Mick talking about his lyric writing. And he's downplaying, for example, the lyrics to Tumblin' Dice. He's saying that they're very good lyrics. And it's my favorite area of the Stones to always think about. And I felt that the Stones, in general, always leaned more on performance and a musical feel rather than crazy lyrics or complex chord changes. Was that your impression, or do you find that they do both in different
I think they
places?
do both. But I think they're underrated as lyricists. And Keith writes probably a good chunk of those lyrics, even the ones that he's not necessarily singing. And over the years, I mean, I think Mick lost the thread at a certain point and just started writing. I gotta write me a rock me song, whatever. I gotta come up with this kind of song. And then he sort of seemed to find some purpose again with like. Um, Sweet Little Neocon or whatever that song is. Like he started to find like like some purpose. Like, oh, I'm not going to just write about having a good time or this or a ballad that's really not invested with some emotional heft. But I'm talking about the prime Stones. Like even to write like a song like where Summer Romance. I mean, it's just it's like those that Emotional Rescue was this record that came out when we were kids. That people like, oh, they're done, they're cooked. They're gone disco or they've gone pop, whatever. But it's the funniest record to me. It's got She's So Cold. So, I mean, Summer Romance is hilarious, but it's clever and funny and like in the tradition of like Chuck Berry or whatever. Like it's not easy. I think people think it's easy to write lyrics that are just rhythmically in rhyme. It's not. I mean, like you said, you preface that question by saying, um, performance sells it. It depends who you talk to, right? Like my wife listens to lyrics first before she probably even hears the music. She's listening to the voice and the lyrics. And I think more people are like that than me, who I just listen to. I could listen to a song three or four or five times before I'm really hearing, or more. Like I was just listening to some songs on my playlist today or whatever in a car, and I'm like, oh, oh, is that what he's saying there? Like, oh, yeah, yeah. It's like, oh, yeah. I knew the chorus, but I never really. It's like even with Dylan, I would listen to the music and the whole first and the tone of his voice before I really paid much attention to what he was saying. So, but all of that said, I think the Stones were pretty casually great with their lyrics. Like, I don't think people understand how good some of those lyrics are. Sway, anything from anything from Sticky Fingers or but yeah, I mean, he was. I think he had so many songs to write lyrics to for Exile that he didn't commit to any of them, and he's just doing vocalizations during their writing process. And then he's like out in LA. It's time to do the vocals, like that at the microphone at the photo that we're talking referencing. And he's talking to the housekeeper or whatever of his motel. And he's like, a hotel. And he's like, you're into gambling. Tell me about that. Like, and he's getting all the gambling tips, or he's doing cut up techniques to, the Burroughs cut up technique of trying to put together words that spark something for him. But those are all legit ways of writing.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I think I hope that when people think of good lyrics for the Stones, songs like "Sympathy for the Devil" comes up and "Sway," and I think "Get Off My Cloud" is fantastic. It's very Bob Dylan-y in that way, where it's just pitter patter of the syllables going, and
Mm.
it's just ear candy for me. But you know,
Under Assisted West Coast Promo Man. It's a song that nobody really kind of, except for like Stones fans, know. But just they take like they take what's they take Maggie and what's the song? It's the old Buster Brown song, Fannie Mae. They
Oh,
take Fannie Mae and which I knew from American Graffiti soundtrack, and they put this new lyric about like they're just making fun of some guy that's like taking them around in L.A. to getting the press, but it's hilarious. I mean, Spider and the Fly, just one of
oh
the
yeah.
great lyrics as well. Like, how do we take a Jimmy Reed blues and make it our own? He's writing about. She said she liked the way I held the microphone. She said she liked the way I held the microphone. Brilliant. Yeah.
You're right. There's so much comedy in across the catalog. And yeah, you mentioned Emotional Rescue, the album, and another song, Where the Boys All Go, is one that's
Yeah.
just the voice and the performance and the lyrics are just kooky.
Yeah, and there's Kooky, and there's She's So Cold, which is like their version of like basically another car. Again, come back to the cars. It's like the new wave, like all of a sudden kicked the punk and new wave kicked the ass of all these old timers who are only in their 30s, as we've established. But there's a difference between comedy, which I think Far Away As is more comedy than humor. Like there's just a winking sense of not taking it too seriously, but also then there are the songs that are really heavy, Sister Morphine or Wild Horses or, Gimme Shelter. These are really heavy songs. And I think even Bob Dylan was a fan of stuff like that. I mean, these are real songwriting, real lyrics.
Did you ever get to hear Bob Dylan perform Brown Sugar?
um, I don't think I have. When Dickie Betts died, I heard the versions of him doing Blue Sky. But
Oh,
no, have I heard him do Brown Sugar? No, I don't know if I have. I don't think so.
it was in the early 2000s. There was a leg of the tour there. I don't know why he decided to do it, but he was adding Brown Sugar to the set, and it was very exciting to listen to.
Yeah. Yeah, he was pulling out weird covers on these last couple tours. Like he got really into the Dead stuff, doing Stella Blue and some other songs. Yeah.
I was tickled. Yeah, I was in Rock Soft, but you say that you are a big fan of a lot of the mid '70s Stones albums when a lot of people begin to write them off, and you were mentioning that during Emotional Rescue, people are like that they're over, but there's a certain charm to those albums that are still there. I've always said that no matter how the album weighs as a whole, there's always one or two moments of true brilliance on all Stones albums, no matter how flawed they may be. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I was coming of age. So, I was like whatever in kindergarten when Exile came out. So, for me it was like I got those early records, like I said, when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. But, it was really kind of I was catching up, and I wasn't necessarily buying records like I wasn't buying them in some sort of chronological order. I was just going back, and whenever I saved up enough money from my paper route or whatever, going back or getting Christmas presents. Oh, I heard this Stones record's good. Like you didn't know what was on those album tracks, really. Like who knew beyond Happy and Tumbling Dice what was on Exile? But it was like that sense of discovery to me was what it was all about. So I remember the first record I remember, being on the radio contemporaneously was Goat's Head. And I was just, I was a kid with wide open ears listening to the radio. I had no older siblings, and my parents were not very hip. I'm sorry, they weren't hip at all. So, they were not into the Stones. They were barely into any Beatles stuff. So, uh, you know, I guess the record I remember going out and buying and like couldn't wait for it to come out was Some Girls. Like that was 12. I was like, okay, that record's coming out, right? So it was all a matter of catching up. But like Goat's Head, so we didn't bring. I guess my point is, people like me and my age, we didn't bring the baggage of like I only knew them and liked them when oh they're different without Brian. Oh, they made their last good record with Exile. I mean that's all bullshit. I mean, yeah, it may be somebody's peak, but I played poker with this guy who's 70 something years old, and he's one of those Brian Jones guys, and I'm like. And he's like, "Oh man, what record is this off of?" I'm like, "This is Goat Set. This is Winter. This is Coming Down Again." I mean, you don't even know these songs exist, you old man. Like you gave up on them. Or Black and Blue or whatever. Black and Blue is a little light, but I mean, Memory Motel, Fool to Cry,
Right.
Crazy Mama, as you said. There's so many great songs. And by the way, the Stones at their worst were better than almost every band, right?
Oh yeah, and absolutely. And the way I've been seeing those albums, Black and Blue, or pick any modern Stones album that people like to, say, I got off the train at this point. My feeling is that even if that album, Black and Blue, wasn't labeled as the Rolling Stones, I'd still be listening to that album by whoever is making that album.
Right.
So it doesn't matter to me. It's still there's something there that I love, be it the Stones or not, as a label or an idea. It's still good music.
Yeah, and I mean, you go to some, like my daughter lives in Brooklyn. You go to some coffee shop. I bet you something like that's playing. Something like Black and Blues play, as opposed to the hits, right? It's like they
Yeah.
found some DJ found this old vinyl, blah, 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 put this on. It's like, I mean, all bets are off now. Phil Collins is considered cool, so, which I still can't quite figure out. But stuff like that, everything is, which I love. But though I love the attitude is like, no, there's no guilty pleasure. I mean, we now have access to all the music made up through yesterday, right at our fingertips at all times. So it's not sort of dated in one era.
Right. Yeah, totally. Um, one last official question here, but it just came to me. What are your thoughts about remixing the Stones' early hits, all the Abco stuff, like the way Giles has been doing with the Beatles and their catalog?
I'm open to hearing stuff. I mean, I was really excited, like when that stuff started to happen, like with Raw Power, Iggy and the Stooges, or Let It Be Naked. But
Hmm.
the results are always kind of a letdown somehow.
Mm.
Like I'm taking about 6 or 7 guys into a studio this Wednesday to listen to stuff in Atmos. I've done this once before with these guys. You take whatever chemical stimulant that you want, and you go into this room, and the music is just coming at you from 7 different directions. I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but these remixes are really cool because you've got all of a sudden the guitars are over here and the vocals are, and it's tricky, but it's all gimmicky, but there's also something really interesting about it. Like a lot of these guys have never heard tracks singled out, period, like never heard stems, even though this stuff now exists on YouTube. So just that alone to hear mixed voice with harmony all by itself or something. So that's not quite your question. I mean, I'm not that interested in hearing remixes, just for the sake of, but I gotta say, this is not the answer to the same question either. Like I was so thrilled when the mono box set came out for the Beatles. The Stones one, there's some interesting stuff on it, but there was something comprehensively better about the mono mixes because those were what they did in the room for up to a certain point. They really weren't paying any attention to the stereo. It was like that was considered like an Atmos like fat.
Right.
So the Beatles had left. In many cases, I think George Martin just sort of said, "Yeah, that's fine. I'll give my blessing to that." But those mono mixes, like Revolution or
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, Revolver rather, and Rubber Soul, they're so punchy because the
Yeah.
drums aren't all off on one side in a weird way.
I
And
know. Yeah.
yes, so yeah, I mean, I'm interested in that, but that's going back to the original source. The I'm not. I don't know if I would want anybody to remix Exile. I mean, you can go ahead and do it. I'm not going to object, but I don't think I'd be that interested in hearing it.
Yeah, no, it's so fun. Yeah, Exile, definitely not. I think Beggars would be my cutoff, for sure, or even Between the Buttons. But like, I guess I thought of it as I was listening to like the London Years box set, and you listen to all of that in one sitting, and you realize like you listen to like I Want to Be Your Man. And it sounds like it was that's part of the charm, but it sounds like it was recorded in the 40s, like
Yeah,
the quality of the fidelity of this stuff makes you go, it's got its charm. They're obviously quoting their blues heroes with this dirty sound, but you hate that. What if you don't want it to get lost among other modern songs?
the records. So, what was the first record where they went to L.A.? Would that have been Out of Our Heads, probably, right? So, somewhere in there where they went to, Chess and RCA, and then you've got some of the greatest engineers of the era working with them, and it's not the Beatles, it's not polished, but it's well recorded. But the early tracks they did with just Andrew Lou Goldham and whoever else up in those chintzy little studios over in Soho or whatever. Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I'm sure those could sound better. But yeah, when I say I'm not interested, I mean I'd be the first one to go to click on listen and go or even go buy it. But I can't see it usurping my versions, you know.
Sure.
Whereas the Beatles mono, once I heard that, I was like, I don't want to listen to the other versions at all, you know. So I just wanted, and it's unfortunate because I have them on CD and not vinyl, so I don't play CDs anymore. But you know,
Yeah, no, those reissues in mono were huge. The Magical Mystery Tour, for example, to
Mm,
hear that in mono was like, oh, fantastic! This is where
yeah.
it's been, and I don't know
And
where.
there are certain tracks on, is it the London or the singles box set, right? The Stones
Uh-huh.
singles box set where the mono mixes do make a big difference. And I think it's just good. It's also the attention of going back and remastering them, period, you know. Remastering is overrated, but it can really bring out some, here I didn't love what I found shockingly jarring. Like I couldn't wait. Like I not only couldn't I wait, but I was like, how come there's just this one side of the El Macambo side for years, for decades? I was like, God, there's got to be more of this. And then cut to the internet age and YouTube, and eventually you could find these bootlegs, and you go, they sound so shitty. Does anybody have? There must be a board recording or like an actual, 24 to 16 track recording of this, whatever. And finally, what, 2 years ago, it
Yeah.
came out, and I was like, but they're clear mountain mixes and he makes them sound a little too big. But I overcame that. I'm like, oh no, it sounds great. Okay. There's a little bit too much clear mountain reverb here and there, but okay, I'm just happy that this exists and it sounds great.
I mean, a lot of people had that struggle because you listen to it, you go, this doesn't sound like a club, you know?
Yeah, that side sounds so intimate and so warm, but there's something about Clear Mountains where he mixes up the crowd a little bit. So you're not just hearing the individual voices,
Yeah.
you're not hearing that repartee. Is everything all right in the critics section?
Oh, I love that part.
Yeah,
That is a unbelievable set. I mean, it's just talk about a performance sells it. I mean, God, they're firing all cylinders there.
yeah.
Speaking of remixes, did you like the Ghost Head Soup remix that Giles Martin did in 2020? He remixed that album.
I don't know if I knew that. So 20
Yeah.
was that when the extra tracks came out as well?
For Ghost Head Soup, yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. Oh, so I must
Yeah.
have forgotten that. Yeah, I don't own it. I don't. Oh, maybe I do. Maybe I do. I don't think I do actually. I don't think I own that. Um, I got some other more, other. Well, I got the Brussels Affair on vinyl, which was
Oh
amazing.
yeah.
But no, I mean, and that era. I mean that live era. Then that version of like Midnight Rambler is just insane. It's like I don't know what speed they were all on, but it's whatever Charlie was on. I want. But no, to answer your question, I'll have to go back and listen to that, or download it, I guess.
Yeah, I'd
Or
be curious
I
to know
don't.
what you think because, I think Goat's Head Soup always had that murky spookiness to the original mix.
Sure.
And then Giles came in and kind of polished it up and really kind of just made it a little bit sharper, which I kind of it's an alternate way to hear the album if you're interested in that. And I think it's worthwhile just for you to go, oh wow, this is another way to listen to this album. You hear things you didn't hear before.
I'm gonna
Um,
listen to it, yeah, today after we get off the call. But yeah,
yeah.
assuming it's streaming or I can
Yep.
just
Yeah,
download it somewhere.
sure
Yeah.
make sure you're looking at the deluxe edition from 2020.
Yeah.
Whichever one has the extra tracks will have the new remix by Giles. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that might have gone by me. I do remember Scarlet with Jimmy
Uh huh.
Page, and yeah, okay, so Giles Martin mixes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Giles did the Atmos mixes, probably not, but there's a lot of Stones in Atmos, and
Yeah.
it's if you ever get I don't know if you just use these, it's one thing, the Super whatever Pros, but if you actually get into a real room with
Yeah.
seven by 4 by 1, have you done that? It's just
I haven't done the room yet. I've done the headphones way of doing Dolby Atmos, but never a room yet.
Yeah, I mean the headphones can kind of get at some of it, but
Hmm.
I mean you really feel like you're in the middle of the studio with shit happening from all over the place. It's not just the 5.1 thing or that, surround sound.
Yeah.
I went to go see Becoming Led Zeppelin, which is in IMAX, that's incredible too sonically, but it's not like wow. There's something that people once they experience it, like Greg Hawkes again from the come back from the cars. He said he heard, I actually probably shouldn't talk about that because I'm not sure if it'll come, but he was listening to music there, and he was like, I don't know if I could ever listen to music in another way. I mean, it's a bit gimmicky, but it's also incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah, I can't wait to do that, and I don't know how I'll be able to. But you mentioned your favorite substance in hand, and it's just another way to experience the music, and I'm all for it. I can't
Yeah.
wait. Was there a particular Stone song that was really like, oh shit, this is fun?
I think I went to Goat's Head. Let me see it. Let me see what my Atmos mix was.
Can you hear the music off Goat's Head Soup? Even with headphones, Dolby Atmos was a trip. I love
Yeah,
that.
I put on Beast of Burden for this one because I just want to hear those guitars work around me and see what's because you never know really until the headphones are one thing, but like until you get into the room, you're not sure what the mixing engineer really did, like where he placed or she placed stuff. But the first one, oh, I did. Well, I did Stray Cat Blues actually on the
Oh,
first night.
nice.
This is my second night doing it, but
What?
yeah, I'm interested in hearing like Winter or Coming Down Again. Like the quieter stuff actually is sometimes the best stuff because it really you can kind of really hear the space and the tonality of things.
Well, you mentioned the quiet things, and I think that was one of the things that struck me, at least in headphones way of doing Dolby Atmos, like hearing Wild Horses and hearing acoustic guitars. Really, I got a shiver because, as a musician, what acoustic guitars sound like in a room. There's an
Right.
extra timbre in it that's reverberating, and for a moment you go, oh, are they in the, what the fuck is that? It's great.
Especially, and this is where being a musician and having some knowledge, especially as a recording musician, came into it and informed my writing about like Wild Horses is a great example. It's like you're like, what is first you as a kid you just hear acoustic guitar, maybe you just hear everything, right? And then your ears get trained. You go, okay, that's an electric guitar and an acoustic. So you get nuance and your ears get a bit more trained. And then you go, oh, I didn't even know this thing called a Nashville tuning existed. Like until I
Right.
got into the studio, and the guys are like, "Oh yeah, 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 this is like used on Wild Horses." I'm like, "Damn, I thought it was a 12 string because it's
Right.
kind of this top strings of a 12 string, but it's just the top strings, and
Yeah.
so it's not the full 12 string thing. It's the flossy, glittery stuff that just brings out a recording, and stuff like that is gold.
Oh yeah, and to that point, Keith has mentioned in one of the acoustic guitar magazine interviews that he'll just dash in a little acoustic guitar in a recording just for some magic dust, and it's a beautiful technique in a recording.
Oh yeah, I mean, and we so Buffalo Tom guys, we knew this stuff pretty even before we went into the studio. As kids, we knew okay, Jimmy Page. Some of the most rocking Who and Led Zeppelin songs are primarily acoustic.
Everly
Like
Brothers.
you, yeah, exactly. It all comes from the Everly Brothers. It's the drive. It's like you got an acoustic guitar in a studio. Well, I mean, a great example is Street Fighting Man, where you record it to a cassette deck and it becomes electrified in its own way, but it's acoustic. But there's something meaty about it. But yeah, it's almost always there as a texture on some of the classic recordings. And we were always interested in being sort of classically recorded like that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, definitely, and that's so obvious that in Buffalo Tom, guitars have a presence that's very strong, and it's part of that lineage of the Stones, where it's other bands, it's almost like it's a guitar, but then the vocal takes the focus, and then but the
Mm.
guitars always have a statement, which
Mhm.
for other guitar players we notice that, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
we could go on for hours, Bill.
we
And
could. Yeah.
as I wrap up here, I'd like to close, if you don't mind, with a little segment called Crossfire, which is 5 questions that I ask rapid fire. No wrong answers, obviously, but just whatever comes to mind for an answer. Are you
All
up for
right.
it?
Yeah, well, let's see how fast my brain works. I don't know.
Okay, here we go. Favorite Mick Jagger vocal performance?
Let it loose
Nice.
for sure.
What is the best Keith Richards riff?
Mm. Can't you hear me knocking?
I agree. Beggar's Banquet or Let It Bleed?
That's a tough one. I'm going to go with Let It Bleed, though.
On my Instagram, I put up Let It Bleed versus Sticky Fingers, and for about an hour, it was a tie until Sticky Fingers took it over.
Yeah, I think Sticky Fingers is most people's favorite record, period.
I think that's true. Uh, you got to have to try on this one, Bill. I'm sorry, but Undercover or Steel Wheels?
Is a song called Steel Wheels? I know. I know.
No. The album
I'm,
Steel Wheels.
the album. I'm sorry. Is there a song called Steel Wheels? I think you're talking about Undercover the Night, the song, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
pretty.
Sorry. That's a
I'm just
great
going to
song.
go ahead. Yeah. So actually, I think Steel Wheels is the better record as far as I remember. But Undercover is an interesting song.
Yeah.
It's one of their most experimental in a cool
Yeah,
way.
absolutely. And I figured out with another friend of mine on the channel, Scott Galupa, who does a guitar instruction Stones videos on YouTube, that we figured out that it's both Robbie Shakespeare and Bill Wyman playing bass on that track.
Oh yeah, and all kinds of overdubbed drums and stuff. Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. Well, I've probably watched. What's your friend's name? I probably
Scott
tried to figure
Galupo?
out Scott Galupo. I've probably tried to figure out stuff from watching him. And it's like, man, I had to figure out. Speaking of, can't you hear me knocking? I had to figure that out for a. We did something some Stones night that I did, and I'm like, oh, the open tuning. It's like you can't play it without open tuning. You know,
Oh,
it's like you
no.
gotta. But
Yeah.
once you open tune, it's like, it's like all right there. It's just like
Yeah.
so simple. Yeah.
I don't even want to try. I
Yeah.
mean, it kind of, I always get a reaction whenever I see people take easy or different routes to these riffs, like seeing people do Midnight Rambler without a capo.
Without the capo at the seventh fret. Yeah.
Yeah. And last but not least, best album artwork cover.
Best album artwork cover, Exile on Main Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Those great shots. Bill Janovitz, an absolute pleasure. Can we share with everyone where they can find more info on your great works?
Oh, just go to billjanovitz.com or my Facebook or Instagram or whatever the kids are doing nowadays. I'm not on the TikTok, But yeah, actually, I'm probably more updating those social media things than my webpage, which is probably still stuck on Leon Russell right now.
Mm. Yeah, and you've got a book coming out in the fall on the Cars.
Yeah, it's coming out in October.
Fantastic. People look out for that. Bill Janovitz, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Justin.